right before Shabbos, but it was abbreviated. So I'm just gonna do a little review from the end of chapter 8, where we finished the chapter. What we wound up saying is that from the Reish, which is a letter which means poverty, because it doesn't have the Yud on the end, on the back of it, which means it lacks a bittul, so it leads to the Kuf, right? And the idea is that the Kuf represents the descending left leg, which is, we said before that the 3 lines of the Hay and now the 3 lines of the Kuf represent thought, speech, and action, but now that it's on the side of the Sitra Achra, it's negative thought, speech, and action. So now, because you had Machshava Zaras and Devarim B'Telim, negative speech, it now goes into negative action, which is that idea that the Kuf digs down all the way below the line and becomes kind of a monster for you there, right? So this is negative action. And that's what we ultimately said. I'm going to take it from sort of inside because we didn't do it all together. It was kind of an abbreviated class. If you want to look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 9 lines down from the top of Yud Gimel. Everyone finds that, please? 9 lines down from the top of Yud Gimel. So this is what we said. I'm going to do it kind of quickly because we said it before for those who were there. We said this is what it says: Habor reik ein bo mayim. That the pit is empty, there's no water in it. This is, of course, talking about the pit that Yosef was thrown into by his brothers. It says the pit was empty, there's no water. So the idea is that there it says the word bor with a vav. There's 2 things. There's the be'er and bor. Be'er is like a wellspring, and bor is a empty pit. And the idea of the be'er with an aleph refers to the neshama, right? And it says, Mayan Ganim Ber Mayim Chaim. The soul is called a wellspring to the garden, right? A wellspring of the garden is this Ber Mayim Chaim, is this well, which is the soul. Why is the soul called a well for the garden? Avram, you sticking with us here, bud? The Kishem, so he says, just like a well flows from below to above, right? And not only does it flow from below to above, but it like sort of increases the water as it comes out. When water comes out of a wellspring, it like breaks forth and creates a river, right? So it becomes stronger. So to the neshama, when it comes out to the body, which is called a bira amikta, a low pit, right? Like basically descending all the way into this world. But when it's occupied in Torah and mitzvahs, from this, it becomes an aliyah of the neshama to a higher place than it was when it started, and that's what it means, Mayan Ganim, that it winds up being a wellspring for the gardens. What are the gardens? He says ultimately when you refine the body, right, you become a wellspring for the Garden of Eden, which means essentially the Gan. Why does it say gardens plural? Because it's the lower Gan Eden and the higher Gan Eden. In other words, as your soul is above, it's already, so to speak, in a refined state, but when it comes down and starts to do the avoda of turning the shtus of the nefesh Bahamas into kedusha, the soul itself is called a well, which goes from below to above. It increases the water as it goes to above, and therefore it feeds the garden. So your soul above winds up getting fed from the avoda that you do down here, because the avoda that you do down here basically is taps into a much more essential level of divinity, which then the soul above feeds from. So it's called the wellspring of the gardens, right? Now we went further to say that that's the concept of the be'er, right? Which is a wellspring, but there's something called a bor also, right? The bor is not with a vav, with an aleph, but with a vav. And this is the pasuk. This is the bor rake. Where do we know about the letters? The letters in the word rake. Those are our bad boy letters, right? The reish and the kuf is, we said, the negative thoughts and speech, which then leads to the thought, speech, and action, the kuf. And that's called a bor, not a well spring, but an empty pit with no water. And that's what it says, the bor rake, right? It's not a wellspring, it's an empty pit. Reish and kuf are an empty pit. They don't have water, they don't have the Torah in them. Yes?
In the pit, when it refers to the snakes and scorpions, which representative of the bad thoughts, on a deeper level, are the snakes and the scorpions representative of the Sitra I saw in the
Yes, they are.
So they're external.
It's real snakes and scorpions were in the pit, but obviously what we're saying right now is that the bor is rake, right? It empty means it has the reish and the kuf. What are the reish and the kuf? The reish and the kuf are negative thoughts, negative speech, and negative action. So that's the sitra achra, right? But the idea is that it's kind of a perfect in the letters, right? Reish and kuf is an empty pit, and that's what the sages said. Don't I know the fact that it says habor reik? Since it says the bore is reik, the pit is empty. Don't I know there's no water in it? Eini yodei she'ein bo mayim. You just told me it's empty. I know there's no water in it. Ma talmid lomer ein bo mayim. Why does the pasuk have to say there's no water? Right? It seems like an extra statement. You just said it's empty. Now you're saying there's no water. I know that. You just said it's empty. So actually, it's not coming to tell you that it's empty. The fact that it says there's no water is coming to explain to you what it means when it said it was empty. It said it's empty of water. In other words, there's no water. In other words, your soul is not active. You're not acting like a be'er with mayim and feeding the garden, so you're just an empty pit. So then what? Nechashim v'akravim yeshbo. So this is what Daniel was just saying. When it's empty of water, it's automatically filled with snakes and scorpions. And what snakes and scorpions? Basically negative thoughts, right? So this is your mind that it's talking about. If it's filled with water, so on the contrary, you're feeding the higher and lower Gan Eden, because when your mind in this world is filled with water, you convert your animal presence in this world. You basically can't get out of being an animal. But when you fill your animal with water, then your soul becomes feeding the higher worlds with divinity. And when it's not, habor reik, you're a reish and a kuf, which means that you are filled with snakes and scorpions, right? This is the nefesh bahamas, the empty pit. And the idea is that there's no water in it, so it's filled with snakes and scorpions. These are the negative thoughts, machshava zaros, thinking things you're not supposed to think. And that's what then creates the kuf. We said from the reish, when you have improper thoughts, then you're going to wind up leading into improper deeds, which is the kuf. And the word kuf, we also said, means what? Kekof bifnei adam. The word kuf also means a monkey, right? So you're no longer really a man. You could be a man, right, if you're filling yourself with thought, speech, and action of Torah. The second you stop doing that, you're like a monkey before a man. You're just an animal, right? Adam is machshava dibur maisa, right? We said that the actual word Adam, Aleph represents thought, Dalid, Dibur, Mem, Maisa. So the three letters of Adam actually are pretty much a direct stand-in for thought, speech, and action. So when you're an Adam is when you have thoughts of godliness. But Klippa is not an Adam. It's only like a kof bifnei Adam. It's a kuf. In other words, in the place of what should be Adam, which is Aleph, Daled, Mem, thought, speech, and action of Torah, you're standing in this guy as a kuf, right? Which is like a kof, which is a monkey. In Kedusha, this is thought, speech, and action filled with the light of holiness. And in Sitra Achra, these are the foreign thoughts. And that's what it says in the Zohar, that in the final line here in chapter 8, that it says that not blin os shin, that the reish and the kuf take a shin, right, in order to stay alive. In other words, that the shin is like a little shine of kedusha. In order for the reish and the kuf to even exist, because since they're basically sitra achra and they're going against Hashem, what even enlivens them, they wouldn't even come to being in a state of existence unless they grab the shin, which is a letter of truth, which basically gives them a little drop of holiness, which enables them to stick together. And then that spells kesher, right? When you put the shin between the kuf and the reish, it spells kesher, which means that's their connection point to being in existence. And also we said it spells sheker, because in order to tell a lie, you need to tell a little bit of truth in the beginning, a shin, which precedes the kuf and the reish, right? And that's how they even have existence at all. Okay, so Kitzer on chapter 8, in Kedusha, Naisa midalid hey. So on the side of Kedusha, from a dalid, which has the yud on the back, but it's a back-to-back level of holiness, it then turns around and becomes a hey, like we spoke about previously, which means from thought and speech, which is in healthy and kodesh thought and speech, you come to be filled with Torah and mitzvahs, which that means your action also becomes filled with mitzvahs. Where on the Sitra Achra, the reish becomes a kuf. From the negative thoughts, you fall even further into negative actions, which is the kuf that goes below the line. Okay, finished Os Ches. Any questions on that?
I heard it was in songs. You were saying before that when we fill up our mind with Torah, there's no, the water, the mind of Torah, and there's no space for all these evil thoughts to come into your mind. Yet, at the same time, there is a well-known concept I know in Brazil, I don't know in Chabad, but when you're davening, specifically, that's when the residual alcohol can come and attack you with evil thoughts and test us to push it away. So then how can one be davening to Hashem and it still have a residual alcohol attack them?
So it definitely does speak about it in Chabad. What does the Alter Rebbe say there? Does anyone know? He says this would be a question if you only had one soul, right? Because then you could say, like, how could I be having negative thoughts while I'm busy having positive thoughts? That's only true if you have one soul. But if you have two souls, then on the contrary, he says, like two people wrestling. When one person sort of digs down and gets very serious in their wrestling, then the other person automatically does the same thing. So he says the exact opposite is true. You might think you're having a bad davening because you're having your thoughts filled with negative thoughts.
Yeah.
He says that's not true. The reason why suddenly you're being attacked in davening, by the way, I don't know if you ever noticed this, but you suddenly, like, you're trying to daven and have kavanah, it's like the hardest thing in the world. All day long you can be thinking normally, but when you like step forward to specifically have kavanah, said all of a sudden you're like attacked with all these negative thoughts. The Alter Rebbe says there that's actually a positive sign, because it means that your godly soul has like sort of geared up for the fight, and that means when like two people are wrestling, the other one all of a sudden has to get in the game. So but the point is that you're never going to be able to fill your thought, speech, and action without a fight. In other words, that's the whole point. The idea is that you have to turn the shtus of this world into shtus of kedusha. So it's not you just like come and the path is clear. The reason why your soul is called a ber mayim chaim, which feeds the higher worlds. You have to understand how like crazy that is. Your higher soul, parts of your soul, which are in the worlds of Yitzir and Bria right now, they're like basking in divine glory as we speak. And yet when you do this, when you fight with your Yetzer Hara in this world, you feed them greater levels of kedusha than they have on their own. How is that possible? Because the quality of light, which comes from fighting that battle, is actually holds a greater level of divinity than what they have just without the fight. So it's not really a contradiction. On the contrary, the whole idea of gaining the thought, speech, and action of kedusha is earned from transforming the negative thoughts, turning the bore into a be'er. So that's basically comes with the territory.
That can be outside davening.
Sure, but I'm saying in davening, you bring up a good point. That's sort of when like the fight is on, right? Davening it says the time of davening is called the time of war, right? Because we're basically, that's why even it's called like a karban, right? Which is in the place of davening is called karav, right? The word karav means war.
Yeah.
Same really letters for the karban. Okay, so is to come close, like to fight with it. So this is the idea of basically turning your shtus, which is also shtusy thoughts, into the shtus of kedusha. Okay, any other questions? That was a good question. So moving into Os Tes, we're going to now take it home. Basically, there's two more osios in the second mimer, and we're barreling towards Yud Shvat, guys. Tomorrow night. That's it. It's happening. Okay, so
what's on the schedule?
V'hine, right now the schedule is Chassidus. V'hine v'mishkan u'mikdash shahaya avoda la'achpia chashuch l'nahora, that in, Yaakov, stick around, baby, in the mikdash and the mishkan, what was we spoke now at great length, the whole avoda was, as we just mentioned, right, transforming darkness into light, not just being like a soul above in heaven where everything's smooth, thoughts, speech, and action is smooth. No, you're dealing with an animal, right? You're dealing, we said, with the kataras, you're even dealing with like a treif element that you have to transform it. And that's the whole concept of the Mishkan, to take this darkness and turn into light. In the avodah of birurim of karbanos, the refinement process of the karbanos, like tefillah. L'chein kesiv, and therefore in this area where we're dealing specifically with transforming darkness into light, it says, vasisas akrashim, right? Omdim. So first of all, we just got through saying, what is the idea of the reish and the kuf and the shin all together? Sheker or kesher, but what is it really called in the Mishkan? There you have it again, keresh, right? Because it's not a simple process. You have to take the shtusi thoughts of the reish, kuf, and the shin and turn them into the beams of the Mishkan, and which is the same exact letters of keresh. That's the whole point he's getting to, right? Just like shtus comes to an atzei shitim, and yet we find this shtus is made into the walls of the Mishkan, so too keresh, the same letters. But after all is said and done, and you've made this keresh, you've done the transformation, right? Then it says that the krashim are omdim. This is going to be the topic of this os. that they're right, which literally means that the boards were not lying flat one on top of the other, but they were standing, which means they were next to each other, upright. So what does it mean what's the significance that the krashim were omdim? Shnikraim krashim b'shem omdim. That this thing which you just turned into a keresh from a sheker is also now has this quality called standing. This is very similar to what we call in general the mitzvahs amudim. What does amudim mean? Anybody?
Stand.
Pillars, right? Yeah, standing, but it means literally pillars.
It's crucial.
What's that? The krushim, the keresh is the name for the board. And I'm trying to point out that it's the same letters as Reish Kuf Shin, the negative letters gets transformed.
Oh, okay.
Just like the Atzei Shitim, which is basically shtus, but here it is in the Mishkan. So what is the Mishkan? It's transformation, exactly what you were talking about in davening. It's specifically transformation of darkness into light. That's what makes all of a sudden this water flood the heavenly worlds, something that they don't have up there and they feed off of. But we're saying when you've done that transformation, the keresh is now called a pillar, omdi. Just like the mitzvahs are called pillars. Where do you see the mitzvahs are called pillars? It says the Taryag mitzvahs d'oraisa, the Zayin mitzvahs d'Rabbanan. Everyone's following inside, 4 lines down to Oz Tes. These 613 mitzvahs d'oraisa from the Torah, and the 7 mitzvahs d'Rabbanan, right? Hem tarach amudei or. The Zohar calls them tarach, which is the gematria of 620, right? 620 pillars of light. 613 and the 7 together becomes tarach amudei or. 620 pillars of light. By the way, the word 620 is the gematria of Keser, right? And
It's Kesser.
Keser is the highest sphere, the crown, which in general is the notion of that sphere which is the highest, which also comes to the lowest place. So the concept which we're going to deal with right now is what's significant about all that we're about to say in the notion of this pillar, as he's about to go on to say, is that a pillar connects the floor to the ceiling. And that's why it's very significant, the 200, that the mitzvahs all together, when you get the mitzvahs of the Torah, the mitzvahs of the Rabbanan, they spell 620, which is Keser, which is the pillars of light, because the Keser is this, only when you do the mitzvah do you reach all the way up to the Keser. Which means, let's say if you're in Gan Eden, you're basking in the glory of Hashem, but not the level of the Keser. You don't reach the top light. Because where do you reach the top light? Only when the godliness comes from the very bottom. In other words, the Gan Eden light doesn't reach so low as to get down here, because basically that's why we don't experience the light of Gan Eden in this world. It's not a strong enough light to reach here. And the reason why it's not a strong enough light to reach here is because it doesn't come from the highest of places. So the light in Gan Eden is like sort of this middle light, which is not reaching the top and not getting to the bottom. The idea that when we bring Elokus, it's in our hands. Right? We're the ones that have to turn we're living in Sheker. We're living in Shtus. So when we nonetheless find ourselves converting this fight and winning and creating godliness into this lowly world, so therefore godliness reaches us. The only reason godliness can reach us is because we're reaching to the Keser. Because it comes from the highest of highest places. Only the highest place can reach to the lowest place. And therefore it's called a pillar. Just like a pillar reaches from the ceiling to the floor. And that's why the word for pillar, the 613 pillars of the mitzvahs, equals 620, which is Keser, right? It all kind of comes together in this beautiful concept. So he says, are you guys following this idea? Yeah?
What was the 7? What was the 7?
The 7 mitzvahs of the Rabbanim. I'm not going to rattle them all off, but basically washing their hands, the lighting the Shabbos candles, Megillah, etc. There you go. So he says, Kamo ha'amud ha'yu mechaber hagag v'aritzpa. So just like a pillar which connects the floor to the ceiling, v'yosem ke'achad mamash, and makes them one. In other words, it makes them joined. Hine kamo kena mitzvahs, so to the mitzvahs hem amudim. So every mitzvah is like a pillar, right? What is a mitzvah? First, what does the word mitzvah mean? It means commandment in the simple sense, but it also means connection. The word mitzvah tzav comes from the word tzav v'chibur, to join. So it's mamish in the name itself that the purpose of this thing is to join the ceiling to the floor. Because basically we're on the floor. So we can put the foundation down, and in order to reach that low, as I said before, it must come from the highest places. So the mitzvahs are called pillars. Shemamshichim mechabrim orein tzuv baruch hu im ha'olmos. They are the things that draw and connect the Or Ein Sof, which is above the worlds, with the worlds, right? Or Ein Sof can only join the worlds if we get in the game, because we can do mitzvahs, right? So essentially, the Or Ein Sof is like this infinite light, always going to be aloof from creation, even the higher forms of creation, even Gan Tachton and Gan Eden Elyon, unless somebody has the ability to draw it down to the lowest place. That's called a mitzvah, which is called a connection. And that's again why when we do a mitzvah down here, our soul is called a well, because ultimately what we just did was we opened up a channel for the Or Ein Sof to enter the worlds. Guess what? The higher dimensions also feed from that infinite light which was just shown upon them. So putting it all together now, what we just said, why the Karshe HaMishkan, the boards, again, Kuf Reish Shin of the Mishkan, are made out of Shitim, Shtus. It all comes together like this. Omdim Dafka. Turn the page. The Fishehem HaMechabrim Or Ein Sof Baruch Hu Ima Olamos. Right? So now we see why these boards are called standing boards, because what happens in the Mishkan, the idea of transformation of darkness to light, the animal, right? And so therefore, the housing of this situation is just beams, which basically connect the Or Ein Sof to the world. The whole thing is like this little miniature, muscle explaining exactly what's happening on a spiritual dimension. Vayinyahu, and the concept is Dehine Kasiv, Gar Chais Kaneh. So there's a pasuk in Tehillim that says, essentially, the simple meaning of this is that Chais Kaneh, Chais is like an animal, a beast, like a chaya. Kaneh is a reed, right? So there's something called the wild beast of the reed. I guess these actually once saw like a big wild boar coming out of some reeds. So there's such a thing. And Gar Chais Kaneh, what's that?
Sounds delicious.
You wouldn't have wanted to be there. It was freaky. And anyway, Gar Chais Kaneh means basically Gar means to scream, to roar, right? So it's the roar of the beast of the reeds, but also can mean to roar at him, right? Vehine Kaneh. So what do we got through saying Kaneh was? Kaneh, what was the Kaneh?
The left leg of the kuf.
Right, the left leg of the kuf, the reed of the kuf. So it says, Hu dachar de klippa. Here he says what it is called the male version of klippa, right? In other words, why? Because it's basically protruding, right? And we know that it's the idea of it's an extension of klippa into the world. Chais Kaneh. So basically, we say the beast of the reed who nukva de klippa, right? So this is going to be the feminine aspect of klippa. The gar chayes kana. What does it mean then? We're going to sort of roar at and disrupt the chayes kana. Shetzrichim lachris esakana. It means you have to cut off the kana. So this pasuk can be meant to say, like when you're sort of being angry at this kaneh, it's another way of saying you got to chop the kaneh in half, right? Which is what we're saying, like in davening. In davening, you're faced with all these negative thoughts.
What's kaneh again?
Kaneh is the reed, which goes down of the left leg of the kuf, which is basically your thought, speech, and it's a culmination of your thought, speech, and action of klippa. Basically, your empty pit, right, which is not filled with water. And what are you supposed to do? Not have any of those thoughts, because that's impossible, because you're a human being in this lowly world of sheker. But what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to gar chayis kana. You're supposed to roar and get angry at the kana, at the negative behavior that's showing up on your radar. Like when you're in davening and you're having all these negative thoughts, right? You're not supposed to say, "Oi, I'm having a terrible davening," because that would be true if you only had one soul. Right? But you have two souls. And so the reality is when you're having all these negative thoughts, it's a positive sign, which means that your mom is getting heated up in Kedusha, and therefore all these thoughts are flooding you, and you have to gar chayis kana, right? You have to basically cut off the leg of the kuf. Shua kana the kuf. Vakasher korsim is a kana. What do you do when you cut off the leg of the kuf? Has naisa. What happens to the kuf when you cut off its left leg? It becomes a hay, right? It instead of going below the line, it stops at the line, and now you've got a hay instead, which is what you want. That's thought, speech, and action of kedusha. V'al derech dekasiv kana v'suv kamalo, like it says, the reeds and the brush were destroyed, right? Kamalo is like cut down.
So how do we cut off the kuf?
Tshuva, essentially, right? Like the same way you take your animal into the offer it onto a sacrifice. That's the same way you take remember we said that 11th incense spice, which came from an unkosher animal, and you bring it into the Beis Hamikdash and turn it into kedusha. Same way you take your shtus and you turn it into atzei shitim. The same way you take your sheker and you turn it into krashim omdi. Right? It's a matter of tshuva. You have to basically transform your animalistic behavior, which is basically just like your will for folly, and make it a will for kedusha. Because we said that your will for folly really makes no sense. Why do you have to eat at certain times? Or why do you have to get up at certain times? Like, it's just habit, nature. It's just the world says so. So I put my fork on the left and my spoon on the right, or whatever it is. I'm not so into the world there, as you might have noticed. But the idea is that all those like sort of rules of the world, they're just foolishness. There's no reason to them. So the idea is that animalistic nature, which has no reason, you're supposed to use that for God. So too, for no reason, I'm going to mamish get up and be always on time for Seder, and I'm always going to, push it and do chitas and Rambam at a certain time, and basically you just like take the willful, irrational willfulness, which is germane to the animal, and you make it do holy things. So instead of letting the animal just like walk around and eat grass, you put it on the altar of Hashem. So it's quite literally just like turning your will towards kedusha. That's how you cut the kuf. Yeah.
I would have to respectfully disagree here, because I actually think that if you look at, for example, in the UK, there's a lot of good derech eretz and manners that we as the Jewish people would do very well to actually take and bring onto ourselves to Hashem.
Like tea time, for example.
Like, for example,
let's take tea time just for a good example, because that's a proper British custom. So what I'm trying to say is that's like a ridiculous thing, right? I'm not saying it's a negative thing, right? The world is ridiculous. Why all of a sudden? You have it also in Israel, by the way. Just it's a little bit more grub. At 2:00, we have a siesta. I don't know. We got it from Spain. Who knows why we just in this city? 2:00, stores are closed. Right? Wait, I just got here. You're closing the door on me. I have like an emergency. Sorry, I have to close the door. Why? It's time. It's 2:00. It's tea time. So even if like you're gonna say it's tea time, so we're gonna sit down and all act prim and proper, and it's nice manners. I'm not saying that people aren't nice. You're missing the point. I'm saying it's ridiculous. The fact that we just like throw like random customs into the situation. That my fork goes on the left and my this goes on the right. Like, why? I can't switch them? Again, derech eretz is another way of saying like something which is like teva. The word teva, as it says in Tanya, is a word which is basically that the fact that something has a nature means it doesn't have a reason for having that nature. It's just born that way. And what I'm trying to get to is that it's a matter of, it could just as easily be that they could put the fork and the spoon on the other side, and it would still be derech eretz. It's just the other way. Yeah. What makes it be this way and that way? Nothing reasonable. Like irrationality, something that just has to be that way because it's derech eretz. You're only proving my point. There's no reason for derech eretz. It's just the way things are. And what I'm trying to say is, really? Because I thought the way things were is that Hashem created the world for us to make a dir b'tachtonim. And if you're not mamash making a bracha, then you can stick your derech eretz where the sun doesn't shine. It's not the point of things, right? All I'm trying to say, I'm not insulting England. You understand? Understand, the point is there any real reason for any of this activity?
I'm not getting the point. So I'm not talking about tea time. I'm talking about good manners when you eat and stuff. Why? Because Chazal say very clearly, no derech eretz, no Torah.
If you slam on the table, it might help. But I'm just saying, But that's Chazal. That's not England, right? So it means that
Right.
the English people are. That's why they're called British, because they keep the Brit, right? No, it's because that's something al pi Torah. I'm talking about things that are not al pi Torah. I'm talking about derech eretz, just stam for no reason, not derech eretz kadmul Torah. They just stam derech eretz. British people, like all goyim, they don't have Torah, right? They might have wisdom, they don't have Torah,
Yeah.
so they have derech eretz stam, not derech eretz kadmul
That's
Torah.
not a good thing.
It's not good or bad. The point that we're trying to make, Daniel,
Normalized.
is that it's just irrational. It's just kacha because there's no reason or rhyme that the spoon goes here and the fork goes there. There's no reason or rhyme that tea time is 2 and not 4. Or the b'chlal they have to have tea and break up your day. It's just kacha. We do it for no reason. All right, and that's the point. That like reasonlessness is animalistic, just like a cow eats grass and he doesn't eat leaves from a tree. It's just kacha. Hashem made a certain nature of things. It doesn't have to make sense. The only thing that makes sense is the rationality of Torah mitzvahs. But if you want that, go to Gan Eden. There, everything is rational. Everybody is learning Torah the whole day. We're in a world of sheker. And just the animals have sheker, the nature of man is sheker, the nature is sheker, and tea time is sheker, right? The point is, we can take dafka the sheker. There's good news to this, right? And you can make dafka from sheker into holiness, that even tea time, you can sit and say a Dvar Torah. And even fork and spoon, you can use in a Hasidus class and talk about how shtusi it is. Now it's Torah. You just transformed the sheker into truth. What you've done is you cut the leg off the kuf, you made it into a hay, and this is what's called Atzi Shitim Omdim. Right? You now have made a pillar where godliness has come all the way down into the world of sheker. Daniel, keep listening. This is what's called the pillar now, because up until that point, godliness came down up into this world and it stopped. And so there was a place of absence of godliness, that little left leg where there's a disconnect of af asisa. So godliness seemingly can't come in here. When I pick up the sheker, and I pick up the tea time, and I make a Dvar Torah out of tea time, I've brought godliness into a place of sheker. That means now that the word sheker is no longer called sheker, it's called keresh. I made godliness out of it. I made a mishkan out of it. And when you do that, you actually reach all the way up to the keser. It's a level of godliness that if it can reach this low, it's a sign that it came from something higher than Gan Eden. And therefore my soul can feed Gan Eden, bear ma'im chaim. So making godliness in this world, which is called mitzvah, which is called tzavsa, a connection, which is called pillars, is the highest form of godliness known to mankind and all the universe. But it comes from making it out of sheker. And which is why our very mishkan is called shtus. Our very mishkan is called sheker, right? Crushing. And it's also why it's called omdim, because like a pillar now, you connected the floor to the ceiling. England is okay, not to worry.
I wasn't even talking about tea time.
But do you understand what I'm saying? After all that,
that,
as long as you understand, we can talk about tea time all day long, even in tea time. Okay, so what we're saying now is that how do you do it? I think, Reuven, we just explained, right? You have to take this very sheker of a world and use it for God. That's called cutting gar chayis kana. That's called like reaping anger at the beast of the field, i.e. cutting off the left leg of the kuf, make it into a hay. And this is called what? What does the word kana spell when you cut off the kuf from the bottom line? Hine kel yishuasi. Right? The word hine is like the ultimate word for geula, right? Hine basically means giloi, revelation. So you take the very kana, which is this nasty creature, and when you do what you have to do with it, you turn it to the exact opposite. You make it into hine, which is what the actual verse of Geula goes on. But Amar Bayom Ahu Hine Elokeinu Zeh. We were going to say on that day, Hine, right? What is Hine? It's not just godliness. It's godliness that was created out of a kana, and you cut it off, and that's why it's messianic. Hine Elokeinu Zeh. Hainu Gile Or Sheyair Vizgal Asud. And that is the future light of Mashiach, cutting off the kuf dafka. Where is the revelation of the future going to come from? From our avoda now. In other words, what we're doing it now. Whenever we have a mitzvah done in this world, we create this connection. We make the pillar from top to bottom. We bring the Or Ein Sof into the world. We just can't see it yet. So all that's going to be when Mashiach comes is that we've already have all these pillars. Someone's going to just take the veil off and see what we've already done. So we've been flooding the world with Or Ein Sof since we got the Torah mitzvahs. It's just we're not going to see the revelation of it until Mashiach. But that means that Mashiach doesn't really bring anything new. It just shows us what we've already done. That's what the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, and the Rebbe quotes every chance he gets, that basically the light of Mashiach is created from our avoda in this time in Gullus. V'lechein ikar giloi hasovev. We'll do one more line. Therefore, the main revelation of the sovev light. What's the sovev light? The infinite light, which is equal in all the worlds, meaning to say that no world can grasp it. Every world can not grasp it equally, because no matter what level of grasp you have, it being infinite is ungraspable. So it's that light which is completely beyond the grasp of the world. But the revelation of the sovev light, right? But often which we said the real concept of is that it shines equally in all the worlds, meaning to say it doesn't shine in the worlds equally because no one can grasp it. That will be beguf de la'asid lavo. That light will actually be most revealed in the body in this physical world in the future to come. Why? Because the body of this world, the sheker of this world, the animal of this world, was the one responsible for bringing it out. Right, the infinite light, which is beyond all worlds. In other words, the keser, the top of the ceiling with the pillars are connected to, the only way to unleash it is with the goof, the sheker of the goof. And therefore, when it finally will come and show itself, it's going to mainly show itself in the goof, the physicality, the sheker of this world will actually be higher than the soul. As it says right now, the soul sustains the body, because the godliness of the soul is required for the body to basically stay in existence. But in the future, the body will sustain the soul. Because the level of godliness which is actually inherent in the body, due to the fact that it's connected with the keser and the sovev light, then the soul, which is from only mamali light and limited light, it will be constantly drawing energy from there, just like we said that the soul above is fed by the mitzvahs down below. That will become revealed, that your soul will actually be fed by your body because it will be the container of the sovev light. That comes from our work that we do now. It's not something we're waiting for. We're accomplishing that every single time we do a mitzvah. This, that the soul comes down and enters into a physical body, and it has all these difficulties, it has these machshava zoras, and it has all this confusion and misunderstanding. Rahman al-Itzlan, like for example, it's exactly 8:30, so we have to stop, right? Even though what am I going to do for the next half hour? Who knows? I'm going to sit around smoking cigarettes and nothing, right? I'm going to have tea time, but I gotta go. I gotta go right now, right? Because
wasting time,
right? Mikveh. Right? In other words, it's exactly my point. When it comes to mamish lunchtime, I have another 15 minutes. When it comes to mamish a mimer, and it's just the way it is. We're like mamish, we're like animalistic people, like with weird rules that we apply on ourselves. No, where do you steal the time? Now is where you steal the time, not in lunch. Right? So anyway, we'll just do one more line while we mutter and complain about it. So it says, this is the idea of all these difficulties, Rahman al-Islam, that come on learning a Torah. Right? I just have to get up now. I must do nothing. The kiyum mitzvahs, right? That gets in the way of our fulfillment of mitzvahs. V'hara misgaber ba'olam hatachton, and the evil is so overwhelmingly powerful in this lowest world. Im kol zeh, and nonetheless, einu mispal mizeh klal. You don't get bothered by it. You don't get knocked over by it. You don't get all tissied and worked up about every little problem that comes your way. You just do mitzvahs. But I have so many things to do. But right now, I got a half an hour to learn Geula and Mashiach, or my pastor has class. I'm not going to think about anything else right now. I'm going to push it away. That strength is called cutting off the bottom of the kuf. And you're osek b'avodasu b'limud Torah, and you're going to anyway get involved in your learning of Torah, despite all the craziness that's coming to you and the fulfillment of mitzvahs. V'adarabba, and on the contrary, hu mitzchazik b'zeh. You actually get strengthened. In other words, you never learn so strong when you have to push yourself one more minute in Chassidus. It's like then it means something, right? So when you have to overcome an obstacle and do it, it's even a stronger level of learning, and therefore there's an advantage of light that comes from this. Koach b'derech milchama. You get an extra power that comes from the fact that you're now doing it by fighting a war. And with Arvoda Rabbah, it's even more and greater strength. Okay, we'll hold here, despite my better interest.
I think I'm blaming it all on the Chavrusa.
Blaming.